Hello, and welcome to the Nurturing Resilience podcast, where me, your host, Leisha Nelson, weaves together the worlds of somatics, science, and energetics to nurture a deeper connection to yourself. This is a podcast that covers a span of topics and ideas, from guest storytelling their rites of passage that catalyzed their resiliency, to nervous system and mind-body health education, to deep contemplation on topics such as cultivating connection to ourselves and others in a complex world. I'm an occupational therapist, somatic practitioner, and body worker, attachment specialist, and baby whisperer, with over 20 years of experience with mind-body connection and supporting matrescence. What you're receiving today and listening today is the uncut version of my podcast. This is where I interview guests and I don't do any editing. You're getting it all in the raw. If you're interested in my podcast, you can find that on Spotify, which is the edited version. And if you're interested in my work, you can follow me on Instagram at Leisha Nilsson, and also through my website at leishanilsson.com. If you enjoy what you hear today, if you enjoy this podcast, please share it on your social media pages with your friends, your family, your loved ones. Let the world know that it's here. If you really like it, you can follow me and write a review. That's how my podcast gets out to listeners like you. And this important information about the body, somatics, and nervous system can find more people that need it. All right, thanks so much, and let's dive in. Melissa, thank you so much for being willing to have a conversation with me today. And I'm super excited to introduce your story and you to my listeners and my guests. I usually start out telling people how I know my guests. And what year did we take Integral Facilitation, the IF program? Was that 2019?
Yeah, beginning of January 2019 we started.
Okay, so I met you in 2019. We took a 6-month Integral Facilitation course together, pretty in depth. We ended up in the same little coaching pod group, and we've continued to stay in contact. And I don't think a lot of people know what integral facilitation is or integral theory. And I would love for you to start with what was that 6 months? What did we even do?
It was amazing. Yeah, so Integral Facilitator at that time was a program run by the primary teacher was Diane Moshel Hamilton, and it was a 6-month intensive on facilitation skills. And Diane brought in her Zen practice because she's a Zen teacher, her years of study and working as a mediator, and she brought in integral theory, which I'm not going to do a deep dive in integral theory, so sorry. But integral theory, very lightly, is a meta theory. It's like the theory of everything. It helps us to look at how to grow up, how to wake up, so bringing in the psychological, the spiritual, and the developmental. And so a lot of what I would say we learned in that course was how to work deeply with ourselves in order to be able to facilitate groups. So we absolutely learned facilitation skills, group energetics, how to work with conflict, and how to work with ourselves. In integral theory, we say the self is the instrument. So the more I'm able to know myself, know my state, know what's going on inside of me, the more I'm able to not let that get in the way and be able to manage it and bring it in. So it's very profound. The most in-depth group dynamics program that I've ever taken, and watching Diane Moshel Hamilton in action I thought was amazing. I was brought to Integral Facilitator by a couple of Diane's students. I'd met her Zen students, and I was like, whatever they have is something I want. And they were like, it's Diane. And so she's just a masterful human and a real privilege to be around. So I'd say that's it in a nutshell, but that was probably bigger than a nutshell, whatever that means.
Yeah, I mean it was a massive program, and I appreciate you bringing up the self as instrument because that's something I often reflect upon and think about is like how am I moving through this world and how do I work with my clients as myself as the instrument. It's not like the tools or the things, like it's literally me and how regulated my nervous system is or isn't, and how I'm responding or not responding to clients. Like that's self. That is knowing the self and working with the self. So thank you for bringing that in. I really liked what was really big for me in that program is the integral theory, the concept of like human development was a big chunk of this learning, and how we all go through a scale of human development. And in integral theory it's more, he pulled in, Ken Wilber pulled in a lot of spiral dynamics, which is that it's not that it's like higher or lower or better or worse. We're on a continual spiral of our awakening process and our developmental process, and individually and collectively. And how can we sit with both? And like, if you and I disagree with something or we're in different developmental processes, how can we still be with each other in a way, seeing that both perspectives are actually true for us? And navigating to some sameness with that, I think, was life changing for me, really, in how I view the world.
Totally. I mean, integral theory is profound in its ability to show us where we're at, to help us make sense of the world, to understand, how we easily get along with some folks and not with others. And I think really simply, it just makes me think like development is really about, in large part, how many perspectives we're able to take on and hold, whether we agree with those perspectives or not, right? The more we can hold many perspectives, the more we can kind of sit in a deeper place in our development. And that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I feel like we are in a very interesting time in this world. I mean, we went through that program, finished mid 2019, and then the beginning of 2020, COVID hit, went into lockdown year in Canada. So what happened in Canada was different than what happened in the United States, and we'd get on calls and swap notes, and I feel like the world since COVID has continued to be a little intense. Like, it hasn't continued to slow down or quote unquote get better. And this concept of holding many perspectives, if you're open to it, I would love to hear your take on, and especially because you study Zen and you have a whole recovery story, which I want to get into with you, both those topics. But like for people that are really in this time and space right now where the collective feels very chaotic, our individual lives feel very chaotic, what is the practice to holding many perspectives? Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, what does it even mean? It's such a good question. Well, very practically, I think about for myself, the practice is being able to sit with it all, which for me comes down to meditation. We're all going to have different practices. I have lots of different practices that I use to help me just make it in the world and feel well and be able to show up and do my work. But meditation has been a primary practice for me because it really allows me to sit with my own stuff, my really busy mind, my overthinking mind, the correlation of all the feelings coming up in my body. And it allows me to sort of drop it all, calm down, relax, focus. And so I guess a way of saying what I'm doing there is cultivating my own presence, my own ability to show up. And so that's really helping me to calm and ground my nervous system so that when perspectives are coming at me, hopefully I can take them in without feeling like I'm getting beat up on, or like I have a crazy amount of adrenaline coming up where I can't, like I'm just kind of getting spun out, you know. So that for me is a pretty fundamental practice, meditating, because it allows me to sit with whatever's going on and hopefully let it go as well. And that just doesn't necessarily happen in every meditation sit, but that's kind of one of my go-to anchors.
How did you first get involved with meditation and a sitting practice?
Well, I have been sober for almost 10 years, coming up to 10 years, and so we could talk about that in many different ways. But early in my sobriety, I found out that what I was doing wasn't just quitting drinking, it was figuring out how to live with everything coming up inside of me. And so a few months into recovery, I was like, I'm really on an emotional roller coaster. I'm feeling everything. You know, often people in recovery will talk about early recovery as like you're thawing out. You were frozen before, and then you start to thaw, and then you're like, oh, this is what's inside of me. It's a lot, you know, what was I drinking over? So for me, what brought me to meditation was simply looking for tools, looking for coping mechanisms that were going to help me really ride out that emotional roller coaster and just figure out how to live differently. So I was really up for anything that would just help me feel better at that point.
Yeah. Did someone recommend meditation or was it part of one of your recovery steps? How did you get introduced to it?
Well, I did go, or do go still, to 12-step groups, so meditation is encouraged. But I didn't hear like a ton about it at first. You know, I sort of heard like this is something that, you know, is part of the steps. But I sort of years before had been into yoga and then kind of just dropped off yoga. So I was like 3 months sober and I was like, maybe I should go on a yoga retreat. Like that's something a sober person would do. I don't really know where the idea came from, but I was like, sober people do yoga. So I was looking for a little retreat to go on. And I found this like long weekend retreat, July, like it was a summer weekend. It was like maybe 4 days. And it was a combination of yoga and meditation. And I met the person who was teaching the mindfulness component of this retreat was this amazing teacher called Jeff Warren, who's based out of Toronto. He runs a local group in Toronto called the Consciousness Explorers Club. And he's like an amazing meditation teacher, and he just really made it make sense for me. So it just connected some dots for me. So I went from there. But yeah, it was really just like looking for help. And I was like, I think meditation and yoga is something I should be doing. So I just sort of fell into it that way.
Wow. Well, congratulations, one, on being, you said 10 years sober.
Almost 10 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's really, really big. Um, and if you're willing, one of the things, this podcast is a little different because I usually will talk to people and I'm like, what's your resiliency story? Or I talk to people and I'm like, what are you offering the world? What are you selling? Or like, what's your genius? And for you, it's kind of both because I'm interested in your recovery story. And then you also have this amazing genius to offer the world that I think came from your recovery, really. Like, that's what I love about resiliency is that once we get out of the traumatic event, we are often who we are on the other side. We're shaped by that event. And that is to me what resiliency is that we can come out on the other side and be shaped and changed. And, you know, just watching you, I didn't know you before 2018, but watching you this last couple of years, deepen your Zen practice and deepen your meditation practice, I've just been really like enthralled of your story and how you're showing up in the world with this deepening of your practice, and then you have this whole other history. So you're kind of this, you're both and perfect for this topic. Perfect for integral, but if you're willing to share just whatever you feel called to share, open to share about your resiliency story and your alcoholism and like what that was even about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and thank you for that. And I think that, yeah, it is a resiliency story. I think about my recovery from addiction as being like my curriculum. It's my teacher. It's the thing that has brought me to this place. And so I'm grateful for it. It's not like I'm like, yay, I'm so glad I'm a person with addictions, but I'm not angry about it either. It just is what it is. And so maybe if I go back to sort of getting into sobriety, into recovery, to explain a little bit, maybe that makes sense.
Perfect. Yeah, start wherever you want in your story.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, so coming up to 10 years of recovery. So I had a pretty massive drinking problem for many years. And like drugs are also part of my story, but alcohol was like my best friend. I love drinking. And for a long time, I just thought I was partying. I just thought like I just love drinking. And, from one standpoint I was, but it was like I kept getting older and seeing some of my friends kind of mature, have like more adult lives, whatever that even means, but just sort of get more stabilized. And I was like, I felt still pretty into drinking actively a lot of the time. And, I always had a job. I was just sort of trying to like make it in life, but it was like dragging this monster along with me. And I think the thing that a lot of people can resonate with when they have addictions, it's not just like one day you're just like going about your business, sort of a normal person, again, whatever that means, and then the next day you have like a massive drinking problem. It's progressive and things sort of become worse over time. That was really true for me. And so I started to see like I'm drinking more than other people. I'm, worse and worse things kept happening to me. And I was like, ooh, sort of like on the inside, like this isn't good. Like I started to drink to the point where I was blacking out, absolutely couldn't remember things. I'm like, so when I started to black out, I was like, this is really not good. Like, why is this happening to me? And I was worried about it, but couldn't imagine quitting, And, I'd go to work and then I'd come home and I'd, do whatever I need to do in the evening, but I was always picking up a drink at night and maybe not getting wasted every night after work, most nights, certainly on the weekends, it just like kept getting worse. So it was sort of like I was watching my life happen and I was like concerned yet also in denial, But then things kept getting worse to the point where I was like, I got sober when I was 34. And so what happened probably in the last year of my drinking was I started to feel, I don't know why I'm laughing, but it was like I was becoming untethered from reality. I was almost like trying to hold on to everything, keep a job, try to be a parent properly, just like live, hide everything. Hiding the drinking was a big part of my drinking. It was like, I don't know if I can keep all this up. And I could really feel like I was losing my grip on even trying to have a job. Like I was like, maybe just that's getting in the way. Like my primary activity that I desired was drinking. And I was like, that's pretty bleak. Like that's all I want to do. That's very bleak. And so in that last year, I really wrestled with it. 6 months before I finally quit drinking, I quit for 6 days, which was like a miracle. And I was like, oh, I've got this, no problem. Then I drank every day for the next 6 months. I was like, oh, I can drink like a normal person. Not true. And so the culminating event, essentially, just to not make this go on forever, was we had friends over for dinner, and I was trying to get everyone to drink as much as I was drinking. I was drinking. And then I kind of fell up and then back down the stairs, and which is not good. I'd never like really fallen down before from drinking. So the next morning I woke up and I was so filled with shame. I was like, this feeling will kill me. Like I was so ashamed. I couldn't imagine living that way anymore. I was like, I can't imagine doing this for the rest of my life. Like, this is awful. And I was pretty upset about the fact that I had fallen down. I was like, this isn't, like, now I'm doing this in front of people, and it's like, this isn't good. I have bruises everywhere. I was like, so like the semblance of holding things together was really just falling apart. And I was like, I actually don't want this to completely fall apart. I don't want this to be my story. And I kept thinking, and this is a funny thing to think, but I was like, did I grow up to become an alcoholic? Like, this wasn't the plan. Like, no one makes that as a plan for life. But I was like, kept thinking, like, this is it for me, So lost. I was just waiting for somebody to come in and, change my life. And I just realized this is the point where I need to stop. So maybe I'll just pause there so I don't speak too much at length. But that was the origin story of my resilience story. I would say that's what was like the catalyst for having to really change my life.
Wow, there's so much there. I think the first thing I'll speak to is I've never thought of it in the sense of like you have your time that you're an alcoholic and then you have your time that you're becoming sober, and both of those are difficult. Like, I never separated it like that before for people or like heard it in that perspective. Like, it's not like you decided to get sober and suddenly your life was good. Like, you had to start climbing a mountain to get sober.
Yes, and that's the truth of it. Mm-hmm.
Which is probably why a lot of people kind of, or might stay in addiction, is like the recovery process itself is a whole other mountain to climb. And hearing your story, just hearing you speak like it was very bleak, or this isn't how my life was intended, and having that awareness that there has to be something more, or that you were intended for more. And that awareness piece is interesting to me because it makes me curious if that's what helped shift it for you. And I'm reading a book about a teenager actually deep in drug addiction. And he gets to the point where he is having that awareness too, of like, I'm failing high school. This can't be my story. This can't be my life. And he does become sober, but it's the awareness piece and how vital that is in our ability to create change for ourselves.
Yeah, totally. And I think we can avoid that, really looking at that for a long time, because what I really believe now and have learned is that addiction is just a strategy of the body to survive. Addictions are helping us to regulate the nervous system, so we want to shift state, right? As you know so well in your work in the nervous system in the body. So if we look at it like, okay, like we're just trying to survive. We're trying to cope with something. So it's like whatever addiction we're using is helping us to get into a different state. So when we take the addiction away, suddenly we're faced with I want to say feeling very frazzled, yet that does not begin to really state how it feels, But it's like we take the addiction, now I just have to be this, thawing out. So there's a lot of work that goes into it, and lots of different things that we can do to support our recovery. But yeah, part of it is really seeing, okay, this is how my life is going. And the circumstances that bring a person to that place will be different depending on the person, right? It's like you can know you have a significant problem, but be like, I can't cope without it, or there's just reasons why right now I can't get sober. And if we just sort of see that, the body is just trying to cope and survive and use strategies, I think it destigmatizes it. We moralize a lot. But if they wanted to get sober, they would. It's like, well, it's actually very difficult. There's probably some trauma underneath that is causing a person to have addictions. So, but yeah, but no one will do it for us either, right? So having that awareness, it's like we can't do it alone, but no one will make the decision for us, But if we're really far gone in addictions, it will be very hard to move out of it. It is definitely possible, but it's just to say it could take many attempts. the right set of circumstances coming together to help us get on the path.
Yeah, like for you, the right set of circumstances was that night of like falling up and down the stairs was like, okay, that's my, that's enough for me. Like you already had this awareness that things weren't going the way you wanted, but then it was like, that was your tipping point to be like, I'm ready to create some change in my life. Yeah. And I think it goes back to that saying, and I think it's very true that awareness is the first step because it's like you can try to help people, but if they don't want to be helped or they're not aware of what's happening, it's like you can't actually help them or do service or be engaged with them in that way.
Yeah, because then it comes down to we're trying to rescue others, right? It's like, let me save you from yourself. Maybe we don't say that, but, or maybe we do, but it's like if we're not ready to make change, if we're not ready to at least be open to trying, and I don't judge. If we're not ready, we're not ready. But if we're not ready, no one can swoop in and do the work for us. That's just the truth.
That's the truth. So you had this great awareness and you realized you needed to make a change. And then what did you decide to do next? Like how did you start climbing that mountain?
Yeah, it's like it took a village of resources and supports to help me get to this place. But initially, I looked for a therapist. So I was living in Toronto, and I went to see a therapist that first week who did a lot of mindfulness work. She incorporated mindfulness into her practice. So I guess that was my mindfulness origin story now that I think about it. And so I went to see this therapist, and I was basically like, help me. Like I was so like, it was just the first few days, and I was just sort of like, I knew it was different. Something had shifted. I was like, I can't live with this feeling of shame. I just hated myself. And I was surprised at how much I hated myself. Like it felt unnatural to feel so badly about myself. So I went to this therapist, and I was like, please help me. And she was like, we're going to find out what you've been drinking over. And I was like, what? I was like, I just drink this much because I love alcohol. I really thought that. I was like, alcohol is my best friend. I love alcohol. But she was like, you're drinking over something that's below the surface. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but we did that work together over time. So I went to see this therapist, and she said to me, you should try AA meetings. And I was like, those are for people who are like definitely alcoholics. Even though at that point, I really knew that that's what I was. And I used to take the online quizzes to be like, on my way home from work, like, am I an alcoholic? And the quiz would be like, you definitely are. I think I am. But I'd be like, am I? So anyway, she says you should go to an AA meeting. Just try it, I was like, okay. So I found one that was happening in downtown Toronto, like over the lunch hour. I was still working at this point. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to go back to tell the therapist, like I went to this AA meeting. And so I go, and it was in a church. And so I'm like standing outside the meeting, crying. And it was across from this concert hall. And there were all of these school buses, because all these school children were being bussed in to go to this concert for the afternoon. So there's like hundreds of kids across the street. I'm standing outside this church crying. And this man comes up and he's like, oh, are you looking for the AA meeting? Like, it's right through that door. And I was like, how does he know? I was like, I'm literally standing outside a 12-step meeting, bawling. I'm like, that's how I knew. It's kind of like funny in retrospect. So I went in, and it just helped me so much. I was like, oh, like I just heard people describing their journey, and I'm like, this is the same. I was like, oh, I'm definitely one of them. I was like, yes. And I just felt so comforted being there. And I also remember feeling like there was like at least 60 people in this meeting, and people just seemed so like peaceful, and almost like their outsides were shiny. And I just felt so gross and terrible about myself. Like I just felt so like this little gremlin, and I'm like, oh, these people have this like soothing energy. So I was like, I don't know what's going on here, but I kept going back, and for me, AA and the 12 steps was hugely helpful. I think there's many paths to recovery, but part of what going to those meetings gave me was social support. So it's just meeting other people on the same path, people ahead of me, hearing people's stories, people with long-term sobriety, people who are relapsing. So, so those in my early stages, seeing a therapist, doing tons of reading. 'Cause I was like, why am I like this? So I read lots of books, went to meetings, started meditating. So those were like the first seeds being planted.
Yeah. And then just like staying with it. I think that's one thing I've watched about you is like you planted those seeds, but you've stayed with meditation. Like you've continued to grow that seed into a full blossoming flower now, really, because you are now a full, I mean, what do we call you in the Zen world again? You,
Well, I study with a Zen teacher, so I'm a Zen student,
you're a Zen student.
and I've been teaching mindfulness for several years. So I'm a trained mindfulness teacher also. So I share the practice with others, and then I sit with a Zen group as well. So I have a Zen teacher.
Yeah. So you really like planted that seed and have allowed it to blossom and just amazing. You brought up two different pieces I want to ask about for anyone listening in addiction or not, or in recovery or not. You keep bringing up shame. And I think that's really big for people to move through and to address on many levels. Um, I always use Brene Brown's definition of shame, but do you have another definition that you like, or how do you describe shame?
Mm. Well, I can't think of a great definition that I wish I could like pull something against this. But I think that shame, any aspect of the self, has a function. And so this is how I see it. So I don't view any aspect as being wrong, like that we need to make it go away. And I would say, so if we look at like what is the function of shame, I would say probably it helps us see, it serves a function in groups as to like what are the group norms. Are we inside or outside the group norms? Like you could debate all of that, what's acceptable and not, but it's just sort of like helps us, not turn into such crazy individualists that we forget about being with the tribe, taking care of the collective. So, shame might help keep us on track lightly, but I think that shame can also be very toxic, and it can be very chronic as an emotion for many people, where we get stuck in self-hating, blaming ourselves, being really stuck in old stories about who or what we think we are. And it's kind of like I feel it in my belly. It's like a weighing down feeling of just that feeling that kind of keeps us from bringing out who we're really meant to be, sharing our gifts with the world, feeling free to just show up as we are and be okay with it. Okay, so I don't know if that's like a definition, but that's immediately what comes up. Does that resonate or no?
No, it resonates a ton. And what I like about that description is that I've never thought about it in relationship to a context to other. So for me, you stealing Brene Brown's definition, she kind of addresses guilt and shame. So guilt being like, I did something bad and now I feel bad about it. And shame being, I am bad. I am a bad person. And I'm realizing as we're having this conversation that in order to have this feeling of like, I am bad, there probably is a larger social conditioning happening. Like you're bad because your family behaves this way and you're not behaving that way, or society behaves this way and you're not behaving that way. And so Therefore, you must be a very bad person, living a very bad life or doing very bad things. And then it brings in that shame and moving from that place of like, when there is shame for me in my body, it brings up a freeze response. So I get very frozen and very, very stuck when there's shame in my system. And I find that to be true with a lot of other clients. Like it's very like it stops you from what you were saying, like from being your free, authentic self, from if you're moving from the opposite of freeze, like to movement. And so I often have this curiosity of like, how do we get from shame and freeze, I am bad, into I'm okay. I have movement. I can be my true self. I can be shiny and bright and opposite of shame. I don't know what the opposite of shame would be.
Like vibrancy, you said vibrant, and it made me feel like vibrancy, like that buoyancy, adaptability, thriving. Is that a really overused word?
In our
Or,
world, maybe. But
even just like being like totally fundamentally okay. It's like, really like whatever is happening here in me is totally okay. That feels free of shame. It's like a deep acceptance.
deep acceptance, I like that. And I'm curious, and I think you kind of answered this, just like moving from that shame space to that I am okay space for you happened through community and through meditation. Was there anything else that helped you?
Yes. I'm connecting things as we're talking. This is so cool. So, okay. So, one thing is connecting to the part about how in recovery, having social support, so having others in recovery really helped me. So, for me, a lot of it was 12-step meetings, but I did other group therapy, just group dynamic stuff. So then it's like bringing my stories out, sharing my stories with others. It stops the shame from suppressing this. It's like, okay, I'm surfacing this, bringing it to light. That helps to transform the shame. Being connected, there's like the solidarity of, I'm not the only one in the world who's an alcoholic, hearing other people's stories. It's like, right. Like other people have been through this, journeyed through this territory. And so there's something about that kind of like transforms the shame. I think that in the 12 steps, and honestly, like there's so many paths to recovery, so I'm not trying to say that this is something people have to do, but for me, doing the steps helped me transcend shame, because it just gives you a program, a way to work with what has happened and to liberate it and to keep focusing on your recovery. So there's that. And then there's another piece that I want to bring in, which is that, and I've written about this, and this is something I've sat with a lot. And in my coaching practice, like I used to say, and I'm like, maybe this is too hard for people to hear, but I really was maybe 5 years ago onto the idea of hate yourself less, like yourself more. And that is a concept that many people in recovery can really get with, because for a lot of us, being in active addictions, we really hated ourselves. We had that shame. And I remember getting into sobriety and hearing people be like, you just need to love yourself. And I'm like, these people are really hardcore. Like, loving myself sounds like a lot, but liking myself I can get with. So it was like this continuum of like putting down the shame, working on the relationship I have with myself, really liking myself. So the way I talk about it now, I talk about friendliness. It's like I could be my own friend. I could be friendly to myself. That's okay. Hopefully I can love myself, but it's like that's a big leap. Maybe not for everyone, but I was like, it felt a little like too much. So I think all of that really is about shame. and its aftermath.
I'm loving so much is like when we were like, okay, what's the opposite of shame? And we went to the extreme. Like we swung the pendulum, right? We were like, well, we have to be thriving and amazing. And you're like, actually, I just need to be okay. And bring the pendulum back to the middle, right? And then it's like, okay, if I hate myself, then I need to love myself. And it's like, actually, if I bring that pendulum back to the middle a little bit, I actually just need to like myself and be my own friend. And I think that's really important in any conversation with what anyone is moving through is I think our brain naturally goes to extreme. Like, well, I'm not amazing, and so that just reinforces the shame. But if I can just realize I don't have to be amazing, I just need to like do the next step and learn how to, or like just be present or just walk in that door of that 12-step meeting. Like I just need to take that next step and bring it into more of a midline that does move us out of that spectrum of the pendulum of like the shame or like hating ourselves or the self-hatred that you named before, back to the middle.
Totally. As opposed to thinking like, oh, other people have these perfect lives, or someday in the future I'll live in this perfect life where everything will be fine. But it's like just do the next thing. As you're saying, it's so true. What's the next thing I need to do? How can I just find a little bit of okayness in my body in this moment? You know, and then the more we do those practices, the more we do find we're okay. And even when we're not okay, we can bounce back more quickly. We know how to resource ourselves, right? Yeah, totally. And I have this like vision of like, you know, like the surly alcoholic like addict like in sunglasses like smoking in the background and being like, love myself, like what the hell are you talking about, right? It's like there's that part that's like, I don't think so, honey. So it's like appealing like pragmatically to we just want to feel better. We just want to have like a decent relationship with ourselves. How do we just lightly, gently take the next steps to get that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I love that you bring up I'm big on parts work right now and like internal family systems has come up a lot more. But I feel like I've always done internal family systems in my own weird
Yep.
way. Like naturally, because I've always had many, I think meditation taught me that I have many characters inside myself. And I'm totally okay with that. I don't think I'm crazy. And totally, like there is like that old crotchety like person that is an alcoholic smoking being like, F you guys.
Cynical, totally, like whatever, dude.
Yep. And just learning to be with that part of myself. Like that part of myself can still exist at times as long as he or she isn't running the show all the time.
Yes, and I think that's like if we do the work, we can get to that kind of developmental maturity. Because it makes me think like I used to think I have to get rid of all this stuff and what's wrong with me, and I'll flip the script and become some different person rather than or as opposed to like the maturity of like okay, I can bring all these parts along, learn what they're trying to do for me. What are they trying to do for me? Like that's really fundamentally it. Give them attention, and as you say, without letting them take over or run the show.
Yeah. So amazing. We kind of went off on this side tangent on shame, and let's kind of go back to your story where you started recovery, you started meditation, you started therapy. Is there anything else you want to add about your recovery story or your recovery process?
Um, well, I do think that as we move through recovery, or if we relapse, we come back into recovery, like it's all good. We need different practices at different times, practices for the self, practices for our relationships, for just managing our lives and our work. And like the personal administration of having a place to live and paying the bills, you know? So I think that I think about my recovery as something I just need to tend to and take care of, you know? I mean, from one standpoint, I feel it's definitely not all of me anymore, you know? There's lots of other parts of me and things going on, so I don't only think of myself as a person in recovery. We're not saying that, but that just comes up now. And it's something I need to tend to. Like, I don't take it for granted either. I don't think I'm like recovered and that's over. I don't hold that philosophy or, you know, that point of view for myself. I know that drinking is just not a good idea for me, and I don't want to test those waters again, you know, because even with really changing my life and learning deep practices that help me cope, I can't risk all of this way of living, you know, by thinking I could go drink a little bit. You know what I'm saying? So from that standpoint, you know, it's like I just know that I need to tend to it, respect it, you know, and I found in the last few months it's sort of been a time when I've been the most tested in my recovery, really since early recovery, because our dog died, as you know, in an accident. He was 4, so that happened just over 3 months ago, and so just been in huge grief. And I've sort of noticed in myself, like, I've been like looking for tools, and I have lots of tools, but there's no way to fast forward through the grief, you know? And it's not even that I want to, but sometimes I'm like, damn, like I'm crying again. I'm crying every day. And that's just how grief is. But like the addict part of my brain is like, I want to escape this. Like, how do I escape this? And it's not fair that I don't get to escape this. And so I just still have to work with that part. You know, I don't feel like in danger, but I'm just being honest about it, right? Because the past few months I felt like the most like needing to escape that I've really felt in probably 9 years. And so I guess I have a relatively mature recovery and that I can ride it out. But there's been times where I'm like, this is not fair. None of this is fair. And, you know, other people get to drink. And then I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty irrational thought, you know? So yeah, it's just something that just needs to be tended to and can be tended to. And, you know, I have coping mechanisms, but life doesn't always give us what we want, as we know. And part of recovery is just growing up, and that's just like a grown-up thought. You don't always get what you want. You just have to work through it anyway.
It's like the adult self that comes online. That's a story I say all the time. This isn't fair, you know, and it's like, but what does my adult self say to this isn't fair? It's like, yeah, it's not fair. And what do you need to do to manage your feelings or your emotions or your discomfort with the unfairness? Which is hard. And yeah, you lost your dog about a month after I lost my dog. Mine was planned, yours was tragic. I've unexpectedly lost another dog, a different dog. And man, that shock of unexpectedly losing a dog is like something I would not wish on anyone ever.
It's
It's
just
like,
the worst.
oh, it's the worst. And I too have been moving through so much grief. Some of the grief I'm moving through is a lot of stuff came up for me in Peru and like coming home. And I would say unprocessed grief came up for me in Peru. Like all the things I never grieved decided that they needed to be grieved in Peru. So I've come home and I just tell people like I'm a crier now and I just cry and I'm not I think there's this fear with grief that it's going to overtake us. Like if we start crying, we're going to lose ourselves in it. And I've just learned that I actually lose myself more by not grieving. And when I allow myself just to break down and cry, I always come out on the other side. I always stop crying. It might be 5 minutes, it might be 20 minutes, but I always stop crying and come out and just giving myself that permission in my body and permission in my psyche to grieve, which I don't think is like a collective permission. Like I'm breaking the rules collectively by moving through my grief openly.
100%. No, our culture doesn't welcome it. It doesn't want it. It's showing the culture something it doesn't really want to see. Um, and yeah, people, many of us just didn't really get a deep emotional curriculum growing up, and that's not to fault. It's just kind of the way it was, and not to fault any one person for that. But it's like, okay, so now we're learning the tools, and lots of us are really opening to our feelings, but it's powerful how much a person can cry. I wrote about this for my newsletter last week. Like, even though I am a strong advocate for crying and crying whenever you need to, I didn't even know a body could cry this much. Like, if another friend said to me, it's like you're getting a crash course in grief right now. And hearing that helped me. It's like, it's true, and I haven't been through something like this before. So where I'm at makes sense. But it's been kind of startling as well to cry this much. It really has been. But it's
Yeah.
love, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah. It is out of love. And it is this space. Are you okay?
Sorry. I had a Siri came on for a second. I'm so sorry. Let me turn it
You're
off. What
good.
happened? For a second, I couldn't hear you. It was because I was
Siri.
waving at the screen. Sorry.
Like, Siri, go away.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, like, none of us got a crash course in grief. I don't think that was part of like how I was raised. And again, it's no fault to my parents. And if I had kids, gosh, I mean, you have a child. How in the world do you give a crash course of grief to your child, even?
You don't. It's going through it, and it's like hopefully learning some resources
Hmm.
along the way, so that you can toggle in and out of it if you're able to. But it just something funny that comes up for me is just the amount of crying I've been doing. The other day I was crying in my car, kind of like in and out of stores. I was like crying a lot. Came home. Later I went out to get the mail. We live in the country in the middle of nowhere, so you have to go to the post office to get to the mail. So this is like later, after a crying period, I go and get the mail, and then I come out and I see myself in my rear view mirror, and I'm just like mascara. Like I hadn't realized I just like mascara all down my face. I was like, no, this is how it is right now. Like it doesn't even matter, like whatever. But I didn't even realize maybe I should be wearing makeup because I'm just like cry face a lot of the time.
Oh, I'm with you. I see you in that, and it reminds me of something you said earlier. I was like, part of moving out of shame and part of moving through your process was realizing you're not the only one. Like there were other people, other alcoholics going through recovery, and that's why I'm so transparent on social media and so open in podcasts is I just really want people to know like they aren't the only one. Like crying with mascara down your face when you go to the grocery store, like that is reality. That is real life. And I say it laughing because it's like, it's so bizarre in our society that there's this story of like, we have to be like upkept all the time and smiling and joyful. And like, I don't want to use the word perfect, but just, yeah, like that
Together somehow.
together. Yes. Like that's not reality to me. And that's not the reality that I see when I'm making connection with people outside of social media, true connection with people. It's like we're grieving about our dogs and the other million things that people are moving through right now.
Totally, totally. Like, it's tough out there right now, and there's a lot of beauty in the world also. Like, I try to hold both, but it's tough. Like, We don't even need to get into the litany of things happening right now to know, like, the world's a lot to hold. So if you're crying in your car, it's like you're not the only. Probably most people are out there crying in their car, and I want them to know that's a good thing.
Me too. And like, I have found holding both, right back to the original conversation, the beginning of this was holding many perspectives. And when I allow myself that grief and allow myself to not have it together, I actually find the depth to not grieve. Like I find the other side of the pendulum, the beauty, the joy, the love, the friendliness. Like I'm able to feel that deeper when I allow myself to process these deeper, quote unquote, harder, darker emotions. I don't even like calling them that because I personally need to move through those and feel those and process them in order to come to that place of beauty and love in my body.
Totally. And it's very heart opening, and it's created like more of a depth of compassion in me, just to like, I was like, I thought I'd been through it before, but now I'm really feeling it. And just, this is what we go through. This is just part of life. It's really helped me feel more for other people as well, And I'm grateful to be able to cry as opposed to stuffing everything down, because it's still in there, right? It still manifests in some way. So at least we can give ourselves the gift of just trying to let it out,
Yeah.
And just know, like, we can make it through. And I would say that one thing I've discovered about grieving is it's also very creative. Like, I've really done a ton of writing in this time. Like, there's something very fruitful in it. And I don't mean like I'm making it productive. Like, I don't mean that at all, but there's a very creative texture to it, which I've been discovering. So that's been interesting.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's like the other side of grief, right? When we get through there, when we get there.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, I would, if you're okay, would love just to transition a little bit to your Zen journey. Um, I think most people might know what Zen is, but if there's someone out there who doesn't, what is Zen?
And if I can't answer this question, they'll take my Zen badge away. No. You know what? Zen is your life. It's the practice of living. It's being in your life. Some would say that Zen is relinquishment. My teacher talks about relinquishment, which is really letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go, which means don't get attached, let go of your attachments. And why we do that, why we attempt to let go, is so that we can put down our suffering and really just be right here in the moment, being intimate with whatever is happening, whatever experience is happening. And so I find it to be a very dynamic practice where I can always go deeper. And I find that it has just been really helpful as a teacher. I think the first Zen teacher I met was Diane Moshe Hamilton, and we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. And I study now with Genpo Roshi, who is Diane's Zen master. And I mean, they're both amazing teachers. And one of the first things I ever heard Genpo Roshi say was to another student. They said, they were saying to him, I used to meditate and sit and have a Zen practice like 20 years ago, and then I kind of just got lost. I went off the path. And he said, well, you're never off the path because you're always in your life. Your life is the path. And I was like, that's awesome. So something about that really struck me. And Zen is called the Sudden School of Enlightenment, so about trying to help us to wake up and then refine that realization. And so, yeah, those are a couple ways of talking about it.
And Zen, for like simple, I'm going to say very simple reasons, is a sitting practice. I know that there's like a zazen, which is a walking practice, and there's koans, which is, another type of meditation. But essentially, it's a sitting practice about stillness and presence,
Yeah. And letting go.
letting go,
Yeah.
letting go.
Hmm.
Because really, if we're really being present, we've let go of the argument that we had 20 minutes ago with someone, or our anger that we've had about this situation, or a future event that we might have anxiety about. Like, we're really just working on letting that go and being in the very present moment. Is that correct?
Yeah, I
Okay.
would say absolutely. And I think I'm drawn to practice because, um, I find the meditative path and the exploration of consciousness, like why are we the way we are, I found that very profoundly interesting. And I'd studied with a mindfulness teacher who was more on the secular side for many years, but I just became very drawn into Zen as a very dynamic, kind of like idiosyncratic practice. The storytelling in Zen is very interesting and kind of wild. And for me as a coach and as a mindfulness teacher, my ability to let go and drop and be still and be with another person is really fundamental to being a good coach, right? Or being a good mindfulness teacher. So the practice, it really goes with that, really supports that, really helps me cultivate presence.
Hmm. Yeah, so well said. And I, just from an outside perspective, have, as you've deepened your Zen practice, just watching you be more present and be more, yeah, just grounded in conversation. And not that you weren't grounded before, because you've always been very grounded, but just I've definitely witnessed a shift in you where you're just more settled, just more
Mm.
like, this is how it is. Like, this is who I am. This present moment is what's happening. Like, that's what there is. Like, being in that present moment. It's been beautiful to watch.
Wow, well, thank you. That's a pretty big compliment if something's working or is visibly working. Yeah, thank you. I there's something about my Zen practice that's like inevitable. People be like, "Why do you sit with a Zen teacher? Like, why did you formally become a Buddhist?" And part of it is totally mysterious, even to me. I'm like, there's an inevitability to it. That's the word I would use, and I can't fully explain it. It's something that's drawing me, which is mysterious, and I don't fully have to know. So yes, I want to meditate and cultivate my presence, and also the mystery is there also. And I like that. And I don't know what it
Yeah.
is. And I'm okay with
Yeah.
not knowing what it is.
Right. Part of that surrendering, and you're a little bit, can I call it a cult? Like, not cult, but a cult, that you're kind of into more of, like, I don't know, those practices or mysteries. Like, there's a mystery to the occultness of things.
Yeah, like esoterica, any form of the esoteric I find like juicy and interesting. I love the tarot. I really just read for myself, but I find tarot and symbology just fascinating. And it is mysterious. And it's like looking at tarot cards, it's like touching into the unconscious for me. So it's like, what does this symbol or this set of symbols bring up? Some people use it for divination. It's like the mystery is contacting me through these cards. And I think there's an element of that, and it's just we can't fully explain it. But it's like, what does this set of symbols that come up in this card just bring up for me in this moment? Um,
Hmm.
so I find that interesting, and I find magic interesting. And I think Zen is like magic. It's like setting intentions and taking action. And that's kind of, I don't know where I'm going with this. I was like, it's intention and action is what magic is. Yeah, and so there's something very mysterious about it all. It's not graspable, but I've always been called to since I was a little child. When I was a little girl, I went to a Christian church. And so I was like, God's really cool. Like, I was just like, believed that. It was like I came into this world with that sense, which I cannot explain either. It's just a knowing. It's just part of who I am, part of what's happening in this body, and always has been.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I do feel like there has to almost be an okayness with the mystery to be willing to go deep into a Zen practice or deep into a meditation practice, because so much of it is about letting go and surrendering and being present and sitting in the unknown. And so there's this place, whether you have to learn to get to that place or you're just naturally already in that place of like, well, I'm okay with the unknown.
Totally. And it's like that's what's encouraged in Zen, not knowing. And then you're like, but I prefer to know. It's like, why? Right? So it's like we're always toggling in and out of that rational mind. It's like, but why? Oh, we can't know. Okay, so I have to accept not knowing. And really all of life is uncertain. But we just fight with that. But in Zen, we're deliberately wanting to cultivate, and experience the not knowing as something good, as something to be with.
Yeah, and like feel okay on our bodies about. And sometimes it depends. Like sometimes I'm like totally cool with the unknown and like sitting in the meditation practice of that. And I'm like, cool, I don't need to know this. And there's other things where I'm like, damn it, I need to know this. And if I don't know, I have so much discomfort in my body. And
all the time. Totally. I'm just clinging. And I'm like, why can't I know the answer? Or like, I thought I had this. I was on this path. And then something just came in and completely took me off in a different direction. So we're always trying to map out our lives. And that's okay. I mean, some amount of predictability is good, right? But cultivating this quality of bounciness, adaptability, no matter what, is going to be okay. That's the practice. And we're always doing that. It's not like we just become, every human being that I know who's a Zen student is still has fear, has anxiety, has questions, has resistance. It's not like it all goes away, but we learn to work with it all as a teacher rather than as something to make into a big problem.
So well said. I love that. Having it be our teacher, just like the grief and the mystery, like it's all a teacher.
I think it's a better way to hold it all, And of course, sometimes, like we're already saying, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to learn any more. I didn't ask for this lesson. Like, can we stop now? But then going, okay, just trying to relax around it.
Yeah. Just be in that mystery. Amazing, Melissa. Well, this feels good. Anything else that you, after this conversation, I mean, we went all over integral theory, Zen, shame, addiction. Anything else you want to share or that I didn't touch upon today?
Well, I really appreciate you inviting me and having me, and I feel like we did, just move to where we wanted to go. So I guess what comes up is, if anyone is listening to this and is struggling in addictions, there's many forms of addiction. We can, as humans, get addicted to a lot of different things, It's okay. Everyone is trying their best, Recovery is possible, and not everyone's looking for recovery. Like some folks just have like coping mechanisms that are maybe a little unhealthy that they prefer to curb. And harm reduction is also like a very important and necessary approach, So I guess that comes up. Like not everyone needs an abstinence-only approach. Not everyone considers themselves an alcoholic or an addict who needs to be fully in recovery, So I guess I would just say there's a whole continuum, and that's all okay, but it is possible. Even when we think it's not possible to change or we'll always be stuck in these patterns, It's amazing how our lives can change. So I guess I'm just wanting to give people that hope as well, and even if it doesn't change today, there's still a possibility
Mm.
that tomorrow it will.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that. You are a coach. You work with people one on one. You have a newsletter. You're into the Enneagram. You do Enneagram readings for people. You do lots of things. So, how can people, you're a meditation teacher, mindfulness teacher. How can people work with all the many offerings that you have?
Yeah, thank you. Well, my website is strongarm.ca, so you can check out my website. I put out a contemplative newsletter, so I write and I share questions or practices and perspectives. So people seem to enjoy that. My readers are always sending me really nice feedback about that newsletter. So that's a really good way to, get in touch with me, kind of follow my perspectives and my work. And then, as you said, I'm a coach, so I do one-on-one developmental coaching, and I help people transmit a confident presence. I work with folks on big emotions, fear, anxiety, sensitivity. And so some of the folks that I work with in coaching are in recovery, and lots aren't. I sort of cover the sensitive, the creatives, leaders, insiders, and outsiders who are working on their inner experience. So I work in 3 and 6 month coaching packages, one on one. And then my only single session coaching offering is around the Enneagram, which is a personality tool. So all that's on my website if folks are interested in learning more.
Amazing. And do you currently offer a sitting practice that people like could come sit with you? Do you do that in like series, drop-ins?
So, in the next few weeks, I will be launching. I'm part of a group of meditation teachers, and we are going to be launching a free calendar of weekly meditations. So, if you follow my newsletter, subscribe to my newsletter, or follow me on social media, that will be forthcoming. I don't have the date, but definitely by the beginning of the new year. And so
Cool.
I'll be doing a couple of free weekly drop-in sessions that are guided meditations. And the 2 topics that I'll be guiding meditations on, one is around harm reduction, so picking up healthier coping mechanisms. Whether you identify as a person with addictions or just want to look for more nurturing life practices. And then the second one, I'm going to do weekly meditation on resistance, because almost everyone that I have guided in meditation has resistance coming up, right? It's like we all know in theory it's a good idea, but none of us really will do the practice. We have this resistance to sitting. So I'm going to focus specifically on that resistance because it's so common. And that'll be coming up the next few weeks, and we'll be doing that on an ongoing basis.
Amazing. And as always, I'll have all of your links in the show notes so that people can get a hold of you for your website or social media and get an Enneagram reading or check out your mindfulness sitting practices, work with you. Super great. So, thank you so much, Melissa. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation and have you join us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.